So, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Planning Committee. It is now 6 o'clock, and I would like to start this meeting. My name is Councillor Mike Fletcher, and I will be chair of this meeting tonight. I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded for publication on the Council's website. So we'll move on to apologies for absence. We've received apologies from Councillor Polston. I'm not expecting any others because it looks like everybody else is here. So, yeah, no other apologies that anybody's aware of from people who presumably wouldn't exist. Okay. And Carly, nobody's late, so I think we're all good. Item 2 on the agenda, minutes. If you recall, you had two sets of minutes. Effectively, we had two meetings in one last time. The 12th of September meeting, which was postponed, and the 17th of October. You'll have had both sets of minutes, and I'd like to move that the minutes of the Planning Committee meetings held on 12th of September and 17th of October be approved as a correct record. Are there any comments on the... So we're happy to approve. Great. Thank you. Item 3 on the agenda, items of urgent business. I've not received any urgent items of business. And item 4, declarations of interest. So does anybody have any? Councillor Arnold.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think I need to sit agenda item number 7 out. I wasn't here for the last meeting when it first came in. Obviously I've missed the presentation, so I think I've just taken a little bit of advice and I need to sit this one out and not vote.
Thanks, Councillor. Yes. Right, yes. And Councillor Sisterson, you are, yes. Okay. So apart from the three of you, is everybody else happy to be here and take part? Fantastic. So Councillor Shinnick, Councillor Arnold and Councillor Sisterson will not be taking part in that debate. Lovely, thank you. Right, item 5 on the agenda, declarations of receipts. Has anybody received any correspondence or had any meetings or discussions they'd like to raise? Okay. I did receive an objection to a potential future application, which I've passed on to, I think I've passed on to yourself, Ash. I'm not entirely, my memory is going. I have certainly passed it on. And the individual was concerned that she didn't seem to be able to get it onto the system. So I've passed it on. It will appear as and when that application comes before the committee. Okay, item number 6, planning appeals. Can I ask Chris Purvis to talk us through the appeals today?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. The report is for noting, but we do have a little presentation on the East Tilbury appeal to assist members. If I just bring that on the screen. Right, so just a summary. Obviously, this was a big decision in terms of the implications to the council and in terms of what is a big development. So the East Tilbury appeal, members will be familiar, it was a non-determination appeal that was considered by, or the report was considered by this planning committee back in July, whilst it was a live appeal, and progressed through the appeal process to a public inquiry in October. Just got a couple of slides to share with you. So just a reminder in terms of what the proposal was for. So an outline planning application, access for determination and those other matters, appearance, landscaping, layout and scale reserved for the future in terms of future reserved matters applications. So it was a two-scenario approach, either up to 830 dwellings if the lower crossing goes ahead, or up to 1,000 dwellings if the lower crossing doesn't. And plus there's other aspects, infrastructure in terms of new local road network, including a bridge over the railway line, which was a big part of the proposal, a primary school, local centre, new areas of open space and formal recreation. So this is the red line of the application site. As you'll probably be aware, railway runs through the middle of it. The main access initially it would be via Muckingford Road, but there's also one on I think it's Princess Margaret Road as well to the southeast. Just a slide in terms of context. So the one on the right is in regard to the red line area, or the order limits as it's called, for the lower Thames crossing, which does influence the top part of that site. The next plan will show that a bit more clearly in terms of land that's needed for the LTC. Oh, sorry, I got the wrong way. And that one, in terms of the parameter plans, there was 4 as part of the application. The top on the left there, the top left is where the land is required for the lower Thames crossing. So that would be the scenario 1 option, the 830 dwellings, and the other one is the up to 1,000 dwellings. There were 4 parameter plans. I haven't included them all here, but there's ones about access from the highway perspective, scale and height, and landscaping. Oh, what's it keep doing that? Right, so it's coming on to the appeal decision itself. So the appeal was allowed. The report was obviously gone through that in more detail than these slides, but just give you an idea in terms of the decision. So there's 51 planning conditions on there, and they will influence the future in terms of future reserve matters and a number of conditions in terms of the uses and things like that. Also a detailed section 106 agreement, and the bullet points there identify what's we've achieved through the 106 and what will be delivered, all of those items. So just some key points from the appeal decision. This is from the inspector's conclusion, and just quoting from that decision, and this is important in terms of how we look at schemes in the Greenbelt. So in terms of this one, it's inappropriate development. That's one of the policy tests, along with the test on openness. There is a loss of openness. So both of those are harms to the Greenbelt, and the inspector found that there should be given substantial weight to those harms. However, obviously with the balancing exercise and looking at very special circumstances, and those very special circumstances needing to clearly outweigh harm, the weightings are given here to the benefits of the proposal, and the inspector found that very substantial weight should be given to the delivery of market and affordable housing in an area which does have a poor record of delivery and no signs of improving in the future. I mean, that's a comment in regard to where we are, the local plan process. The other point there is the significant weight given to the bridge itself as a very important piece of infrastructure that can help obviously link the south part of the site to the north, but also there's clearly a wider benefit for anyone south of the railway line, and that currently experiences delays through, when the level crossings closed in East Tilbury. Other weighting in terms of moderate weight was given to those other benefits of biodiversity, primary school provision, recreational facilities and economic impacts. And the important thing here is this 4th bullet point. It's these factors that would, taken together, clearly outweigh the harm to the Greenbelt by reason of inappropriateness, loss of openness and harm to the purpose of the Greenbelt. So the inspector found that the very special circumstances justified the grant of planning permission for this proposed development. So just, this is my own interpretation of the table that you see in our reports regularly, and there's one obviously in the report tonight for Park Lane. And this table identifies the harms on the left and the factors promoted as very special circumstances on the right. So that just gives it a bit of a clearer way of understanding the weightings that are given. This is very substantial weight given to the housing position and those other factors, as the inspector stated in his decision, that meant the application was therefore allowed on appeal. Happy to field any further questions, Chairman.
Thanks, Chris. So any questions from the committee about that one? Councillor Kelly.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for that presentation. I think for me, as a councillor, it is getting very difficult and very confusing now to try and sum up these applications. It was less than 2 years ago that we had an application in East Tilbury next to the rail line. It was 250 homes, 100% affordable, and that was officer recommendation for refusal. Now we approved that scheme, and it was very difficult to try and get it over the line. So much so, when we approved it, it then got dragged back. And we were warned that the risks of approving this scheme, and here we are 2 years later, and it would appear that these schemes now are just being signed off willy-nilly. Now, what's actually changed in the NPPF? Not much has changed. The only thing that's changed is, it would appear, attitude towards schemes in the Greenbelt. So it's incredibly difficult to try and get your head around. I'm very worried about access. If you look at the cross keys into Chadwell, at the moment that's very, there's a lot of traffic there, and this is only going to make that worse. So it'll be really interesting to see, how this progresses. The only other thing I would say, we do need the crossing over the rail line. So if that could be implemented in the early part of this scheme, I think that would be important. But it's really difficult now to try and get your head around, what is acceptable in the Greenbelt, what's not. Bearing in mind, the last 2 years we've had a lot of schemes in the Greenbelt against officer recommendations. And it would appear now that this stuff is just getting approved for the sake of it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Chris, do you want to come back on any of that?
Yeah, just a few points there I can come back on. The NPPF, there hasn't been any change since December last year when the current one came out. We're aware of the consultation that came out in the summer, and there's a new NPPF in the offering soon. Could be before the end of this year, as I understand it. I think in terms of these decisions, and it's not just Thurrock here, we've seen other decisions beyond Thurrock in the home counties around London. There's been one in St Albans, and there's been one in Hertsmere as well, where both of those authorities don't have a 5-year housing land supply, so a similar position to this council. In fact, their housing land supply is slightly better than ours, because ours is less than 1 year. So the housing land supply is where the very substantial weight has been given to this decision. And just on the cross keys point, in the section 106, again, from when we considered this application in July, and we had a position where we had insufficient information on highway grounds and other insufficient, there was a load of information, as the report says, that came in from July all the way up into the inquiry. So information came in that addressed the council's highway concerns, and there's mitigation identified in the section 106 for improvements to the cross key junction. I'm not sure if Julian knows off the top of his head what that is. Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Chris is right. In the 2 months leading up to the appeal, we worked very hard with their highway consultants to actually get the information that actually we required. So it's not the only mitigation that there will be. There will be further mitigation measures at the Manaway roundabout. In terms of the cross keys, it will be an additional lane on the Muckingford Road side to enable traffic to get across, because the main queues seem to be along the Muckingford Road. So we'll be able to get more traffic to turn right, which currently blocks the straight-on traffic. So there'll be that mitigation measure. And obviously, as Chris mentioned in his report, we've worked really hard to get the bridge included and make sure that the development takes that into account when it's being built.
Thanks, Julian. Steve.
Thanks, Chair. I don't want to do this to death. I certainly agree with Councillor Kelly. It is difficult because fundamentally nothing's changed, but the rules seem to be being interpreted somewhat differently, and that bothers me a great deal. But like Councillor Kelly, it's just where we find ourselves. One of the things that keeps getting missed, and I don't know if we have any way of influencing it, but when the government merrily dishes out the volume of housing they want built, we really just are lumbered with a number. And the reality, and I had the figures, I've probably still got them somewhere, but about 3 years ago, 50% of the houses that were bought in Thurrock, that wasn't necessarily new houses, that was just houses in total, were bought by people from outside of Thurrock. So we're building new houses, and the same with the other home counties. And what's happening is people are being disgorged from London. So I think we're always going to be on our back foot. It doesn't matter what we do. We're going to get lumbered with a number. It doesn't change our issues with housing, people waiting for housing, social housing, or any other kind. And the bottom line is, it becomes a free-for-all. And the third point, and I know this was mentioned, has been mentioned before, but is there a way that we could force developers, when applications have been approved, so there's no reason whatsoever why they can't start them, but they choose not to? And it kind of, we're stuck in the middle there, because the stuff we do approve, if they don't go and build it, then it just makes us look even worse. But the reality is, it's not within our gift to force that at the moment. And I wonder if there's a way of lobbying or trying to influence that. Anyway, they're my comments. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Steve. Chris, I mean, that is a point for me. I suppose I'm uncomfortable with the idea that lack of housing provision should start to, or should seem to be becoming such a sort of a Trojan horse. But one of the reasons, not the only one obviously, but one of the reasons why we don't have the housing supply that we should have is that we've had a number of quite significant applications approved over the last few years and not progressed. So, to Steve's question, is there anything we can do in terms of enforcement, or do we have to just accept it?
And all we can do is as a council, grant planning permissions for these sites, and it's down then with the developer or the landowners to then decide whether they want to implement those permissions or not. We can't control or make people do that, and there's obviously lots of factors beyond just planning permission, the economy and borrowing money and things like that for people to implement these permissions that would have an impact on that. Just on the point, actually, when someone said nothing's changed, and correct and right in saying the NPPF hasn't changed, but the council has published its 5-year housing land supply position in the summer, and that was a requirement of the East Tilbury appeal, that we were required by the inspector to do that. We've been working on it with our policy team for a while anyway, but it's something we had to do, and that identified that a position is less than 1 year's supply, and of course the inspector has to consider that as a material consideration in his decision making, and it's obviously significantly low, and an issue in terms of that he's found that very substantial weight has to be given to that.
Councillor Lydiard, I'll hand over to you in a second. I just wanted to ask a question based on that, if I may. So, less than 1 year's supply of housing, based on what?
It's an assessment undertaken by our policy team. So they look back over the last 5 years of planning permissions and what's being implemented and how many dwellings are being built over those periods. There's a whole spreadsheet on it.
But I mean, in terms of who decides what equals a year's worth or 2 years worth or 5 years worth?
There's a whole methodology and formula that's identified in the NPPF and the PPG that all councils have to follow, and they have to follow that criteria in terms of doing that work. And it's something the policy team, it's not something I haven't done, I've done before, but it's something I've seen, obviously, from the policy point of view.
And is that linked to the point that Steve was making about the numbers that appear to be arbitrarily handed down by central government that then become our target? Do they figure in this?
They are identified, as I understand it, for the creation of the new local plan, because we're working on the current local plan and what the trajectory is in terms of housing trajectory as set out in the policies. I think it's policy CSTP1 that has the number of dwellings per year that we should be doing. And obviously, for whatever reasons, and it's not just us not granting planning permission for some, and you've got to look at it as well from a bigger picture, that we're looking at sites in the current local plan that doesn't have any real allocations, and we're very much reliant on developing on brownfield land. Until we've got a new local plan and Greenbelt is released, it's always going to be very difficult for us to achieve our housing land supply needs at this current time.
Thank you.
Daniel's got his hand up, just so you're aware. I appreciate I can't see him.
Yes, sorry, Steve. I'll be back with you in a second. Dan.
Thank you. One other thing to add to Councillor Kelly's question. It's correct to say that NPPF hasn't been changed in a big way on Greenbelt, but there has been movement in some of the other guidance which applies to Greenbelt, most notably in PPG. So historically, 10 years ago, there was guidance in PPG that indicated that unmet housing need in itself wouldn't be enough for a VSC for the purposes of Greenbelt. Now, over time, that's changed and has been removed from PPG, and then you have some inspectorate decisions that have sort of progressed in that way and moved away from a historic position in around 2015. So I just wanted to flag, obviously MPPF itself hasn't changed in a big way, but the guidance built around it has. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Dan. Councillor Lydiard?
Thanks, Chair. Chris, the developer offers affordable housing by percentage, but is that based on gross floor area, or is it based on the number of units? Because it doesn't seem fair if he offers us all one-bedroom units and he's selling 3 and 4 bedroom units. What's your view on that?
The affordable housing levels, there's two different amounts that are shown because it's a two-scenario approach, and it's up to 830 or up to 1,000. So it doesn't mean it's going to be 830, and it doesn't mean it's going to be 1,000. That's where it gets a bit more complicated. But back in the spring, a viability assessment was submitted by the appellant to the appeal. We then got that independently checked, and there was a whole process throughout the summer up until the planning appeal inquiry on looking at the viability, and the viability is a big technical exercise, looking at all kinds of costings and things like that, about how much things cost, infrastructure costs and things like that. And floor space comes into that in terms of the valuation of properties and things like that. So we got to the position, and it's in the report in terms of the percentages that's identified for affordable housing. So in scenario 1, that's 15%, and for scenario 2, it's 27%. So that is obviously less than the policy requirement, but the policy does allow for viability exercise in situations where they can't provide that. And obviously the big factor in this scheme that's affect the viability of the scheme is the provision of a bridge and also the cost of a primary school. So two infrastructure elements of the scheme that need to be provided and costed up. In terms of the mix and things like that, the Section 106 has got a whole formula in terms of achieving the right in terms of bedrooms, numbers per property and things like that, which again, that was influenced by the council's housing team in terms of what we need in terms of meeting affordable housing needs. So that's all set out in the 106. So if the planning permission is then implemented, those requirements will come in, and what we'll see through the reserve matters applications in the future, because there'll be more than one, because it's a phase scheme because of the scale of the development, is we'll see at each reserve matters how many of those properties would be affordable housing at that stage. Okay.
Thanks, guys. So I'll take one last question, and I think we probably have to move on because we've got some fairly chunky ones coming up tonight. Councillor Sisterson.
I just wanted to ask a question about affordable housing through the chair. And obviously, I think from what I read, 20% of, I'm not sure if it was this one or the Park Lane one actually, but there's two types of affordable housing, aren't there? There's one that's affordable in terms of like council housing affordable, so it'd be covered by housing benefits, this sort of thing. And then the other, how affordable is that? If you understand what I'm saying. How much below market rate would it be?
I can't tell exactly what the prices of the properties will be or what the values are. In terms of what's affordable, the MPPF identifies a definition of affordable housing that has to be used. I'm just finding it now. So it's either affordable housing for rent, starter homes, discounted market sales homes, or other affordable homes, routes to home ownership. I haven't got the Section 106 in front of me to go through the detail of exactly what they are, but again, I'll come back to what's been required in the Section 106 agreement follows on from what the council's housing team have identified in terms of affordable housing needs for the borough. So that's all captured within the 106 in terms of future delivery for this site.
Is that okay, Councillor?
Well,
would you like
it's just
to?
not really clear. If it's like shared ownership and things like that, it's not always much cheaper to the purchaser than, just buying it. But anyway, that's just a comment. Thank you.
Thank you. So, I mean, just to sort of summarise before we move on, because it's, I I think this one in particular, we had some of us were able to attend a meeting on this earlier in the week, and it certainly raised a few eyebrows. It seems to me that the key points coming out of this are that, okay, the MPPF as at now isn't changing, but it appears, as Dan says, that the guidance has moved on, and particularly that the question of housing supply appears to be starting to take more weight, particularly with at least some inspectors. So, yeah, the ground is, for me, that means the ground is changing. As I understand it, this wasn't the only factor in leading the inspector to approve the application. Obviously, the bridge, as was mentioned, and the school carried a fair bit of weight, but it does appear that the most important single factor appears to have been the lack of housing supply. So I think that's probably, for me, the thing that comes out of this particular appeal in terms of where we stand. Yes, going back to what both Dan and Tom have said, it does appear the ground is shifting a little. Okay, if everybody's, I hesitate to say happy, but if we've reached a point there that we can move on. What I'm going to suggest, item 7 and item 8, I'm going to suggest we switch them round, because item 8, I think may well be a shorter discussion, and I don't want to, I don't think it'd be fair to have the individuals involved in item 8 sitting here for an age before their application gets discussed. So if you're happy with that, I will move to item 8 first, and then we'll go back to 7. Councillor Arnold.
I mean, it's completely your prerogative, Chair. I mean, I'm more than happy to just attend, while it's going on. You don't need to switch the order for my benefit, or our benefit, so up to you.
No, I think it's, I'm thinking about the guys out here, actually. But yes, of course, I do bear you in mind as well. Of course,
Sorry, me. Selfish me.
Of course, you're front and centre of my concerns every minute of every day, Councillor. So in that case, we will move on to item 8. 8 is the new 7. Let me get to it. All right. So item 8 is land adjacent to Hellebrine, Curling Lane and Measons Lane. And may I ask Nadia Houghton to present the report?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. I'll just get my presentation up now with the help of Carly. Thank you. Hopefully, yeah, excellent. Okay, so I'm just waiting to make sure it's displaying. Hopefully there's no echo now and you can just hear me like a normal human. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for bearing with me. So yes, this application is a Section 73 planning application relating to land adjacent to Curling Lane, Hellebrine and Measons Lane. It's been called in by councillors to consider issues relating to habitat disturbance, parking, overdevelopment and whether the proposal is in keeping with the area. So just as a reminder for members, the site is in the southwestern corner of the Badgers Dean estate, and as you can just see on the aerial in front of you, it's a rectangular site that is bordered by Measons Lane, running north-south to its western boundary, and Hellebrine to its east and southern, and the remainder of the Badgers Dean estate to the north and east. Here's an aerial showing the extent of the site. Now, members may remember this site came to Planning Committee around about 5 years ago now, where Planning Permission was recommended for approval to members because in principle the land is residentially designated, albeit with landscaping and trees and other vegetation on the site within the Badgersdean estate, but it was residentially designated, so there were no in-principle objections. There were various technical matters that we assessed and processed through the application, and at the time there was concern regarding ecological and landscape impacts resulting from the previous proposal that came to us in 2019 and members called in. That application members overturned and refused on the basis of concerns about the character impact because there were no technical grounds to refuse it at the time in relation to the concerns that members raised then. That was appealed by the landowner and applicant at that time, and the application was allowed at appeal. Subsequent to that, a condition variation section 73 application was submitted and approved in July 2021, which detailed small changes to the ground floor layout of the scheme and some external material changes to, in an attempt to better improve the appearance of the external materials given the concerns raised by residents at that time. And that application was also approved. So just as a reminder, this is the approved layout here. It's 8 semi-detached, two-bedroom houses built across 3 levels because of the banked steep topography on the site. And here's an indication of the layout of the site, of the approved site plan, and showing the proposal which relates to what's relatively a minor alteration to the lower ground floor, which I'll come on to, of the scheme. This is the first floor showing where the amenity areas as approved on the site. And just as a reminder, this was the approved ground floor layout, which essentially had the main front entrance and the parking spaces and a staircase within the front entrance leading up to the main properties, and an external staircase access through the parking area to the private amenity space on the next floor of each property. This area immediately to the rear of the main entrance was intended and approved as a void area. This Section 73 application is solely seeking an amendment to the approved plans in order to create a storage area that comprises around 17 square metres, serving each of the 8 units there, along with 2 single windows there and a minor small change to the external staircase. So this was the approved elevation, and it's this lower ground floor part we're referring to here, just to the left or right of the main entrance. And the other alteration relates to a minor change to the construction of the staircase leading to the private amenity space at the rear. So these are the proposed plans. So this lower ground floor plan indicates the storage area as proposed, and you can see there'll be a proposed small window there recessed in that lower ground floor front elevation, and a smaller window in the hallway there, and changes to the staircase on each of the dwellings. This is a proposed ground floor plan that shows the main living areas, and the proposed first floor plan. There's very little change, if anything, on these plans here at all. It's predominantly on the lower ground floor. Some elevations. That's the roof plan, just showing the solar panels on the roof, and cross sections here of the scheme as proposed. You can see the ground floor window in that cross section that looks directly forward facing it at the front of each of the semi-detached pairs. And here's a cross section from the side, and it shows the creation of the storage room on the lower ground floor, the insertion of the small minor window, and there would be a retaining wall built as part of the structure with a very small change with the creation of a small void area potentially at the rear of the private amenity space there. And this is the proposed front elevation showing the rendered wall and that window I've mentioned, and that's a rear elevation which demonstrates the difference in levels on the site. And the proposed flank elevation, which shows the differences, the minor differences in the staircase leading up to the private amenity spaces. There's a 3D images provided by the applicant indicating the proposed alterations, and some recent images of the site. So this is an image taken from Helleborine looking north, with the end of the site on the immediate left there and the existing vegetation, which would all remain. And this is looking back towards the most southern end of the site and shows the site that's obviously well underway and under construction. And some closer images of the pairs of semis that are being built at the moment. In all other respects, the proposal complies with all relevant core strategy policies. The proposal has already agreed, the applicant has already submitted the discharge of conditions applications relating to the conditions that required approval for the scheme, and they've already been agreed, and those that are still relevant to the development are also included within the recommendation before you tonight. So these images are all from the Helleborine end, directly showing the amount of development underway at the minute. I also got some images from the Measons Lane end, because I think that's useful for members to see as well. So this is at that junction I mentioned earlier, and some images of the site there beyond the tree line along Measons Lane. So in summary, the principle of the development of the 8 houses has already been considered and consent has been granted. Conditions requiring discharge and agreement have already been approved. This application solely seeks to vary the details on the plans already approved in a rather minor way on the lower ground floor in the main. The proposed creation of a storage room on that lower ground floor, along with the additional windows and the alteration to the external staircase, would be acceptable with respect to the design, character and impact upon appearance of the area. Overall, the proposal would have no adverse impacts relating to landscape, ecology, character and appearance, visual amenity, neighbour amenity, parking or highway safety, and it's recommended to members for approval. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Nadia. And at the expense of stating the obvious, so all that's being required of us is to consider these changes. We're not in a position to go back in time.
That's correct, Chair.
Right. Any questions for Nadia from the councillors? Clearly a very clear and persuasive presentation, Nadia. Okay, if there are no questions, then we'll move on to debate. Oh, my apologies, we have a speaker whom I've totally ignored, and I humbly apologise. Mr. Coward, thank you very much, and once again, sorry. Carly will show you how to, they're a bit temperamental, but once the light's on, you're good to go. And we will be allowing you 3 minutes, I believe.
I'm going to be very brief. I've obviously heard the presentation and there's been no questions, but I think out of courtesy we like to come along and just say a few words. The scheme, as you've been apprised, is extremely small. It's a small void area at the back of the 8 houses. It was to be backfilled, and what the proposal does is simply add this little room. It's about 17 square metres, and so it works to improve the quality of the accommodation. As set out in the officer's report, there's no third-party objections, and at paragraph 9.2 it is noted that both the landscape and the ecology advisor equally had no objections, and there's no adverse landscape effects. So it's a very simple application. It's a helpful addition to the property, doesn't affect anything else, clearly doesn't affect parking, which is particularly important. That's it really. Just wanted out of courtesy to come and thank you for the positive recommendation.
Thank you, Ian. Do any of the councillors have any factual questions for Ian? Fantastic, thank you. And that means we will move on to debate, although looking across the line, I'm not sure whether anybody wants to open that one. Okay. In the absence of that, I will move on to the recommendation. So the recommendation is on page 95 and is to approve these variations subject to a number of conditions. So do I have a proposer for that? Thank you, Councillor Kelly. And a seconder? Councillor, Councillor Byrne. Thanks, Steve. Okay, all those in favour of the recommendation? I think that's unanimous. Thank you very much. So the recommendation is approved. Thank you. So that allows us to move on to agenda item number 7. We're about 3/4 of an hour in. I'm going to assume that we're okay just now for a break. We'll move on. Okay. So, item number 7 is land west of Park Lane. And may I ask Lucy Mannion to present the report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so this application is for outline planning permission with all matters reserved except for access for a residential development of up to 90 dwellings. I'd like to draw members' attention to 4.1 of the update report. The word "not" should not be in that sentence. Okay, this is the site location plan. So the site area is 2.77 hectares and comprises of unkempt grassland. The site is situated within low risk flood zone 1 and the site is within Greenbelt. Okay, this is an aerial photo of the site. So the site is situated centrally in this photo. The site lies immediately north and east of existing developed area of Aveley. The site is bordered by Ormiston Park Academy to the north, and Aveley Football Club is to the east. Bellis Park is to the north and east of the site. So this is the proposed master plan layout, which shows the proposed location of the properties and the open spaces. But as it's an outline application, the detailed plans will be assessed at reserve matters stage. This is a photo of the site viewed facing northwest from Lance Corporal Nicky Mason Way with Ormiston Park Academy in the background. So this is the site viewed facing west from Lance Corporal Nicky Mason Way. The housing opposite is to the left of the photo with the site on the right. This is a site viewed facing northwest from the junction of Bellhouse Avenue and Lance Corporal Nicky Mason Way. Next, we've got some aerial 3D photos of the site. So this is the site viewed from the east. So it's centrally here, so you can see that there's development on most most boundaries, and then Bellas Park starts adjacent to the site because it is, even though it's Ormiston Park Academy, some playing fields, it also is within Bellas listed park. Okay, this is the site viewed from the west. So the site is to the, so it's here, which is to the right-hand side of the 3D photo. And this is a site viewed from the southwest. So again, it's centrally within this image. So these images show how the site is constrained. Therefore, in terms of purposes of the land being within Greenbelt, this has limited weight in the planning balance. So next, obviously we discussed this at the last meeting and went through the proposed reasons by members for refusal. So the update report takes you through those, but we'll just go through them. So reason number 2 was the impacts upon infrastructure with specific regard to impacts on education and healthcare. Carly, oh, it's only on my screen, don't worry. Ignore me. So the concerns about education and healthcare services, they've been mitigated by the contributions which have been accepted. So the applicant has agreed to these. So the NHS contribution would be 46,400, and the education contribution can only be formally calculated at reserve matters stage. So we've got independent council opinion on the reasons which were put forward by members, and the council opinion is that this reason would not stand up to scrutiny at appeal. So I've copied onto this slide some of what the council opinion was. Okay, so the next reason is reason 3, which was lack of transport links. So the site is considered to have an acceptable effect to the highway, and council opinion is that there are no grounds for a reason for refusal on highway grounds. The council's internal highways team and national highways have no concerns regarding the development. Okay, so on to reason 4, which was regarding the urban design officer comments. So the site, that was, they said about a piecemeal approach and lack of connectivity. So the piecemeal approach refers really to the application being submitted before the new local plan is in place. But we are where we are on that. And in terms of connectivity, the applicant would provide a new toucan crossing across Lance Corporal Nicky Mason Way. And again, council opinion is that the comments would not provide a basis for a reason for refusal. And lastly, reason 1, which was that the development would have a substantial harm to the green belt with reduction in openness. So it's considered that the factors put forward towards very special circumstances clearly outweigh the harm to the green belt and any other harm. And council opinion is that very special circumstances are evidence within the application, and it would be very difficult to defend the position of substantial harm to the greenbelt should the application be refused and go to appeal. Right, the next slide is a summary of the greenbelt weightings. So this is all fully assessed in the report, but this table, summarises. So harm to the greenbelt, very special circumstances and other harms are weighted and a balancing exercise is carried out. Okay, this slide is just for members' information because the applicant had a similar application in St Albans recently. This was refused by members against officer recommendation. This scheme is, the St Albans scheme is less constrained than the application site that we're looking at today, in my opinion. And St Albans has a higher housing land supply. So the scheme was upheld on appeal and costs were awarded against the council. Okay, to summarise, the development is inappropriate development in the Greenbelt, but the factors put forward amount to very special circumstances which outweigh the harm of the proposal. There are no objections to the proposal on grounds of amenity, heritage, or highways with appropriate conditions. The recommendation is to approve the application for the reasons as set out in paragraphs 7.1 to 7.4 of the October report, which is an appendix. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucy. So we'll go to questions. Obviously, quite a lot to digest there, and it's quite a full and comprehensive report, so thank you for that. Councillor Byrne, please open.
Lucy, when you started this, you said it's unkept land. Should we look at unkept land or well-kept land as different sorts of land on the Greenbelt? Why do we start it with unkept land? Is it not all the same land, Greenbelt, whether it's kept or unkept?
That was just in relation to trying to describe the site, so I wouldn't take anything from it. It's all Greenbelt, definitely.
Councillor Maney.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Lucy, as always. Can I ask why officers have felt it necessary to go to the lengths and expense of seeking a KC's opinion on this particular application? It seems somewhat extreme and a bit unnecessary for really a relatively small development. I just wondered why this particular application sort of drew that response, really.
Thanks, Councillor. Lucy?
Yeah, we take council advice fairly frequently, and I think it comes down to the risk to the council with the implications of if it's refused and then if it goes to appeal and being open to a costs award. So the relatively small cost of council at this stage was deemed to be important by management.
Dan, perhaps you'd like to come in at this point?
Of course, yes. It might be useful to add, Camsell in this case was quite a junior planner, so I think as well the council will take into account the amount of money that it spends on its Camsell. I believe his call was in the last 5 years, so he should have been substantially less expensive than a KC.
So if I understand it, just before we move on, so if I understand it, what you're saying is that given the circumstances, given the fact that we were minded to refuse, you felt that you needed to assess the risk to the council based on that. So I think it's primarily for that reason that they've gone to council. That said, obviously it's handy to know what his or her, their opinion was on the reasons we've given. So yeah, I wouldn't take it any further. Yeah, I wouldn't take it as any as having any greater meaning than that, I think. Any further questions? Anybody else like to? Steve.
Thanks, Chair. And it's really following on from that, and it's probably not a question, so I'm not aiming this at Lucy because that's probably not the right place for it. But what it suggests, and what if and having read the detail of what the councillors suggested, it begs a question why we would ever bother to look at any application that's put forward for recommendation. Because from what the council is saying, and I have read it in minute detail, it suggests that the likelihood of, shall we say, changing opinion is pretty remote. And if that's the case, then I would suggest that the committee is not in a position to represent the electorate. And I thought that was the purpose of it. So I don't quite know how that works. So it's like I say, it's not aimed at Lucy at all, really. It was just carrying on from the previous councillor's question.
Thanks, Steve. I think Ash would like to come in there.
Okay, through you, Chair. So the committee's purpose is to determine the applications, and that's on a planning basis. So rather than representing the electorate, ultimately, that's the function of the committee. So we have to sort of distinguish that sort of mandate, as it were. You've got to make your decisions on the planning merits of the case. I would say that ultimately the committee, will have to consider every case that comes in front of the committee. The weight that is applied, for any applications may be different. And when you look at the officer's report and the balance that they've put forward, that will differ case by case. And as Chris articulated, within the East Tilbury appeal, there was very substantial weight to the limited housing supply, but also the provision of the bridge. So each case will be different, and then it's up to committee to come to their decision. And ultimately what we are doing is advising committee, but ultimately it'll be up to committee to come to the decision. What we're trying to do is guide committee in their decision making and make sure that if committee are not minded in line with officer recommendation, that the process that you come to is a thorough one. And that's our job ultimately. We do have to protect the authority against the risks, and that's not for us to sort of threaten committee or anything like that. Our job is to advise. Ultimately, it's the committee's decision.
Thanks, if I may just come in a second there, Ash, if I can just take issue with that, I do believe it is the purpose of this committee to represent the residents of Thurrock. It is the reason that we are sat here. However, I do accept that if we are to differ from the decision of the officers, what I take from this is that we have to be prepared to argue our reasons and to put forward arguments that are robust enough to stand up to challenge. All that says, that doesn't say you can't differ from the officers. What it says to me is that if you're going to differ from the officers, it has to be able to stand up. You have to have good reasons, robust reasons, that you are comfortable will withstand challenge. Okay, that is that. It may sound like a subtle difference, but it is very much in our remit to differ. And if it weren't, I wouldn't be sat here, frankly. But what we should be taking from this is we just need to be able to put together a strong argument. And what council has, I suppose, done us a favour in doing is to say, right, these are unlikely to stand up. Okay, that doesn't mean you must agree with us. It means that we may need better, more robust reasons if we're going to disagree with the officers. That's my interpretation. Is that okay? It sounds like I'm getting away with that one. Steve, back with you.
Thank you. And I understand that, and yes, I see the sense in it, and I don't have an issue with that. But what I do have slightly more of an issue with is if you listen or read what council has suggested, then to put forward the arguments to substantiate a challenge, i.e. objections, you would need to have the same qualifications as these guys over here. and frankly, none of us are in that position. And that's why we rely on their advice and guidance as a general rule, for the right reasons. But equally, if you follow his guidance, we would all need to go to college or university for the next 2 or 3 years. And that says to me that this is a busted process. But anyway, thanks.
Mind if I bring Dan in too, because I can definitely see how it can appear that way, and I'd like to get some clarity on that.
Well, I think as a starting point, planning has become over the years far more complicated than it historically was. And even just understanding MPPF today compared to where it was when it was first introduced is much harder. Council's advice, as with officers' advice, ultimately is, as has already been said, guidance. And I think the utility of council's advice is you should see that as a framework within which this committee makes its decisions. The interpretation of MPPF is ultimately actually a matter of law, but how it is applied to a given set of facts is for this committee. And I attended the meeting a couple of days ago where there was a discussion about what is openness and how does Greenbelt work. The position on the interpretation of a policy is law, but then you as committee members will have feelings and understandings that inform how you interpret that policy. And I think that is the middle ground between two things. It doesn't necessarily require you internally to, look at this all through the framework of, well, if I don't have a degree in planning, that's the end of it. It's very much use the MPPF and your local plan and all of the policy to inform how you come to decisions. That's, again, difficult because there's so much of it. Yes, planning has got to that stage now where there's just so many documents and it's very hard to put them all together easily. I know that doesn't give you an excellent answer, but yeah, that's sort of where we are.
Thanks, Dan. Councillor Byrne?
I don't know to direct this question to, really. If we had a 5-year plan, 1-year plan, or whatever, would it give us more muscle to reject these kind of applications in the future? Is it because we haven't got the plan that we are basically stuffing our residents?
Yeah, so not having a 5-year housing supply means that there is a tilted balance towards approving planning applications for residential properties, so yes.
And back with you, Dan.
Just to assist as well, how short your supply is affects that analysis as well. So just following on from Councillor Kelly's question, I went back and looked at your housing supply for the last 10 years. And in the early 2010s, you had over a 5-year supply, and that will have been impacting how decisions were made by this committee 10 years ago. And then 5 years ago, it was 2.5 years, and now it's 0.9 years. So you're correct, Councillor Byrne, in the sense that as things have changed, the weight in favour on this issue has become stronger. And that's what you see with inspectors as well. Inspectors give significant weight, as you've seen in the presentation earlier, to this specific issue. And as the number changes, the weight gets greater or lesser.
So basically, the way I'll see that, as Steve says, we're going to become pointless, aren't we? And unless we've got a 5-year plan, we can become less and less effective because we've got to say, yes, we know it's going to go through. Our training doesn't matter, and that we are going to become a pointless, ineffective waste of 3 hours, aren't we, as time goes on.
Thanks. Yeah, I think the point's been made. We are basically into the debate stage now, and I think that's absolutely fair. So, point taken, Gary, that it's difficult to see how much power we have to differ when our circumstances and the lack of housing, available housing, is clearly weighting the balance against us. Can't disagree with that. But Ash, you have a point to make?
Yeah, through you, Chair. So it is incumbent upon the council to get a local plan, which will ultimately get us a 5-year land supply. In the absence of that, you can increase supply through, obviously, permission approvals. So, you know, ultimately, why it might not be the ask of the committee or the desire of the committee, when we do get approvals coming forward, that will obviously boost our supply. Clearly, we've got a long way to go given how poor our supply position is.
Dan?
Sorry, I know I keep chipping in. Just to add as a response to that, Councillor Byrne, obviously there are lots of factors that point in favour of, for example, in this case, protecting the green belt, and there is that weighting, which ultimately, if you have very, very valuable green belt, it may be that you come to the conclusion, even with that being the case, we disagree with committee members. I mean, I don't know if it assists to say, but for example, I'm acting in a matter unrelated to this council where I'm resisting 390 houses in the green belt, and it's incredibly valuable green belt because of its location and nature compared to the rest of the town. And so I think in law, the position is you aren't fettered by the fact that you have this housing supply issue. You can still exercise your judgment. It's just the weights change as that number changes.
Yeah. Councillor Maney.
Thanks, Chair. So, yeah, I think we've established that there is an issue there then. So tonight we've established it. Officer in the case, the advice is that the council not having a local plan would go against the decision if it went to appeal. So for the record, I'm not going to be making any planning decisions which are influenced by the fact that we can't agree a local plan and the recent decision to delay the local plan. So my decisions on planning will be based purely on the merits of the application on the night, and I'm not going to let the fact that we don't have a local plan sway my judgment.
Thanks, Councillor. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I feel bound to point out that one of the reasons we don't have the housing supply is not purely the wait for a local plan, it's also the fact that we have given approval to a lot of large planning applications on which not a sod has been dug, if that's actually English. So, I mean, a lot of the planning permission we've given not having been acted on, that contributes in quite a large way to the lack of housing that's actually currently. I think it's probably worth starting to move the debate onto exactly as Councillor Maney has said, the merits of this case. And I would suggest that having been given a fairly good understanding of the fact that the goalposts have changed slightly, I think it is still important to hear your views on the strengths and the weaknesses of building on this particular area of land. That I think we need to continue to do, otherwise there definitely is no point on us sitting as a committee. So may I invite some comments on the particular case. Councillor Byrne.
Yes, well, the training we've had over the last 6 years, this says to me there is significant harm to the greenbelt, and that's not changing it. So judging by what we've been trained and what I know, you'd have to say no. We've got no choice. So it really now, but then we understand that it's going to go through and it could cost us lots of money, blah, blah, blah. But our training and what we know, unless we have a different form of greenbelt training, it's so hard to vote on it, isn't it? Because it is a significant harm and there's no way getting out of that.
Lucy, would you like to come back on that?
Yeah, so in the way we have to look at greenbelt applications, and it's the various weightings. So you're right, it is inappropriate development in the greenbelt, but we need to look at greenbelt, and there's 5 purposes of land being in the greenbelt within the MPPF. So the fact that this site is constrained on three sides by built form, and it's also constrained to the north as it's Bellis listed park, which can't be built on. So this site is, yeah, because it's constrained, it's not like a site in the Greenbelt, kind of in the middle of nowhere. There are characteristics, which is why in the weighting exercise, I've come to the conclusion that it does clearly evidence very special circumstances.
Also, so it's in my head, we've got a scruffy bit of land in maybe Tilbury and a nice bit of land in Alsett, but they're both the same bit of greenbelt for us, because that's how I've been trained in it. So I'm not getting my head around where's the difference between that bit of greenbelt and that bit of greenbelt, because it's still all greenbelt, isn't it? It's not. We seem to be putting different values on different areas, whether it's scrub land or lots of grass and that, or it's pretty and mowed or whatever. So I don't. I'm struggling anyway.
Lucy, is it worth? I mean, you mentioned the different aspects of harm, and you've also you've mentioned, for instance, the fact that this piece of land is constrained. Would it help to ask Lucy to explain why that decreases the weight? Because I think we're all struggling with the same thing: greenbelt, greenbelt, greenbelt. So, what is it that makes this piece of greenbelt less valuable, or less, less of a problem to lose than another piece of greenbelt somewhere else? So, perhaps if you could give us some guidance on that, that would help.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So in terms of, so if you go to the report, which was an appendix, which was the October report, then in paragraph 6.8, the 5 purposes, so the purposes of why land is included in the Greenbelt are set out. So these are from the MPPF. So went through an exercise to basically weight these and see if they apply to this part of the Greenbelt. And the conclusion is, so these are such as check the unrestricted sprawl of large built-out areas. So with this site, it's constrained, therefore it doesn't lead to unrestricted sprawl because it is restricted. And another one of the purposes is to prevent neighbouring towns from merging into one another. And so the overall weighting, I don't know, Carly, can you put up my presentation again? Okay, so yeah, this is the table of Greenbelt weightings again. And the only, I mean, it is as Daniel's said, there's a number of different factors which are kind of competing in this balancing exercise. And the site being Greenbelt, which is on the edge of an existing settlement, makes it sustainable, and and as I said before, conflict with the purposes of of land being within the Greenbelt are considered limited.
Can I just have a go at what I think we're saying here is that substantial weight's been granted to the fact that it is inappropriate development. No getting away from that, it is. Therefore, there's substantial weight. The weight in terms of reduction of the openness is limited because there are things built around it. Yes, sorry, not limited, moderate. I meant limited with a small L, but yes. So that what we're saying makes this less of a valuable piece of green belt than perhaps another bit is the fact that because this came up, I think, quite a lot in the original presentation, that it is surrounded by either built land or by land that can't be built on, and therefore it's the potential of this piece of land to impair the openness of the wider environment is limited. I'm not even sure I've actually made that very clear, but is that getting a bit closer?
Yeah, that is exactly right, Chair.
Thank you. I'm getting somewhere. Councillor Lydiard, then Councillor Maney.
Thanks, Chair. Probably a question for Ashley. When we talk about a 5-year supply, what are we talking about in terms of numbers? Because earlier on we just agreed to a potential 1,000 at East Tilbury. What numbers are we looking at? How many houses are we behind where we should be, do you think?
Okay, for you, Chair. So looking at our 5-year land supply, our total need over the 5-year period is just under 7,000. So that's for the 5 years. So you divide that up to per annum. That gives us a requirement of just under 1,400. Now, unfortunately, it's not a case, say, with the Tilbury appeal that all goes in to your 5-year, because with such large-scale development, there's quite an enabling period, and they've obviously got to go get their reserve matters. So the reality is, best case for those ones, you get some at the back end, but it potentially can start chipping away at that need.
So it only counts if it's built, basically.
So with the 5-year land supply, the test is we need to be confident based on a sort of methodology that's within our 5-year land supply, that will come forward within the 5-year period. So it's not that it's built, but we need to have confidence that if we were challenged, it would come forward. So if you've got a full planning application in front of you with a proper phasing plan, and that's all within the 5 years, to me, I would be confident in defending that position.
Thanks, Ash. Councillor Maney and then Councillor Byrne.
Thanks, Chair. Lucy, you said that Bellis Park can't be built on. Okay. No, that's not necessarily so. Maybe not for housing, but the football club was given consent a few years ago. And this obviously eroded some of the land at Bellis Park. We recently saw, didn't we, an application for a 3G pitch at Bellis Park, which few people wanted. So the park can be eroded by certain developments. Sorry, I'm moving away from the mic here. And that risk remains, really, doesn't it? So that's why it's important, I think, to keep this land. Okay. Or have I missed something there? Sorry.
No, you haven't missed anything, and you're correct that there has been, I think there's a current application for the 3G, 4G pitch in Bellis Park, but the site is also a playing field as well. So I should have said it's extremely unlikely that anything would be built on that site, because it's kind of like double protection, because it's a grade 2 listed park, Bellis Park, acknowledging the fact that the M25 has been built through it, but that's that's like a national project. So yeah, it is extremely unlikely that planning permission would be given for a site which is both within a listed park and a school playing field. And Greenbelt.
Okay, thanks. But I do respectfully disagree with you about, you say the site is contained. I believe it contributes to a wider open area on the northern side of the bypass. The presence of the football club doesn't erode the openness or the vista. So the loss of the site does create unacceptable harm to the greenbelt, is my view.
Okay, so that's fine. That's your view, but officers consider that the site is contained and it is on three sides by developments, and yeah, as we've said, by Bellis Park to the north.
So I suppose we'd agree that it's constrained on three sides. It's the fourth side we are not all of the same opinion on.
I think what Councillor Maney was also referring to the football club, because it's not, houses or...
But it'll still be a building.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Byrne, I think you were next.
Yes, it's kind of what Ashley said. Do I tell you we're 7,000 houses behind being on an even keel? Does that mean we've actually got to find 7 East Tilbury builds just to draw us level, or are we over 5 years? We've got to find 7 equivalents of East Tilbury.
Not exactly, Councillor. And as I mentioned, with East Tilbury, the reality of that coming forward in that 5-year period is highly unlikely. What we need to do ultimately is get the local plan and allocate sites which will come forward in that 5-year period. That's the reality. In the absence of the local plan, when applications come in front of us, we need to give that significant weight in terms of our position, and will that contribute to the 5-year land supply? That is something we need to consider. We're in a reactive situation at the moment, unfortunately, in terms of how we're having to deal with it.
Thanks, Ash. Thanks, Gary. Sorry, yes, I am on. Councillor Maney.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry. You mentioned the Toucan crossing again, which we know about, but that's going to link the south of the bypass, isn't it? It doesn't link the Kennington's estate. There's no linkage between the proposed new development and the Kennington's estate. I mean, my residents, Councillor Sisterson's residents, feel fairly isolated there as it is on the Kennington's estate. I mean, there is no linkage at all. It's completely cut off.
Yeah, this site, so in the bottom west, sorry, of the site, then it links up with Kennington's. Yeah, would you say there? So there isn't really an opportunity to link this site to Kennington's. I wouldn't have thought, because looks like someone's garden, I think. Yeah, so the Toucan crossing is, to the south, linking this development to the wider part of Aveley. I think Julian wants to come in on this.
Thank you, Chair. We're looking at links for the development to obviously the main part of Aveley, and that Toucan crossing is that link. So that the main area that residents would want to go to get transport links or do their shopping, a little bit of shopping or whatever or go to the school, for instance, would be coming into the main part of Aveley. So we're looking to link that site to obviously the main part of Aveley. Unfortunately, if we could have done, then we would have asked for links to other parts, but because, as it said, the site is locked, if you like, then it's difficult to do something like that. I understand there are requests for links from the Kenningtons, but unfortunately that's not something that we could have asked for from this development. You know, from that point, we're looking to improve transport links and whatever is from that development. So that's why the crossing is there. You know, if we were in a position to ask for more, then we would have done, but we weren't in a position to do this. It's quite a small development, and to ask huge amounts of mitigation is not really appropriate in terms of the planning requirements.
Councillor Meany, you want to come back on that?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Julian. Thanks, Lucy. So, no, you're saying if you were given other options, then yes, you would have preferred to have linked it to Kennington's, but you can't, and it's not possible. So that tells me that it is not the right development for that site. I don't want my residents in Kennington's cut off in that way. They're cut off completely. There is no linkage to that. That's a huge estate, Kennington's. They've got to go north to get south and get back again.
Lucy.
Yeah, so with planning applications, with Section 106 or other community contributions, they need to be directly related to the proposal which is coming forward. So we couldn't require this proposal to kind of provide anything for an existing area. So yeah, so in legislation and in the guidance, we have to make sure that any benefits which are gained through a planning application, have to relate specifically to that planning application.
So if I understand that rightly, if we were minded to put in a condition around not isolating Kenningtons, however that might be, that you're saying that wouldn't be an appropriate condition to put in?
No, it wouldn't be possible. We could put in an informative.
And how much weight does an informative carry?
It's not, so it's an informative, it kind of is what it's in.
I can just assist Lucy on that. So the informatives are there to guide the developer, so we can't enforce against an informative. That said, in my experience, the developers are typically quite responsive to informatives. And the only reason we will go with them is it doesn't meet the tests for a condition.
Councillor Meany?
So, clarify then, there's no weight to the Thurrock crossing, really. The Thurrock crossing, really, for me, is not really, it's not. Okay.
So in terms of carrying weight as an advantage of this development, you're saying the Thurrock crossing doesn't really bestow an advantage. Now, are we in danger of conflating two things? So it's not so much about whether it gives an advantage to this new development, it doesn't give any advantage to the existing Kennington's estate, is what you're saying?
I suppose it doesn't give any. Well, I can't say. It might give some people from Kennington's might utilise the crossing, but the crossing is being put forward by this application to make the site more accessible, more sustainable.
So they're trying to meet a different need, I think, from the one that Councillor Meany is talking about.
Yeah, so anything that's put forward, relates to the proposal. So we couldn't ask for something to help an estate which is very Kennington's, which is very well established. This is to do with the planning application that we have in front of us.
Thanks, Lucy. I mean, I would say, I suppose, if we are talking about this being a valid development, because it fills in creates the filling between existing developments, I think it is legitimate to look at how it benefits those existing developments as a reason, as one of the potential advantages. It's not being built in isolation. It will, in fact, sit between Kennington's and the centre of Aveley. So I think it is a valid point that people living in Kennington's may wonder what this new build actually does for them. So I think it's a valid point made, but thanks, as you say, for the developer, what they've proposed is a solution to a different problem, namely the linkage of the new estate to the centre of Aveley.
Yeah, because legislation and guidance, we can only ask for within the planning system with a planning application. We can only get benefits which relate to the actual, yeah.
Thanks, Lucy. I'll move on to Councillor Lydiard, and then if we need to, we'll come back to Dan. So it's Councillor Lydiard, then Steve, then I think Councillor Byrne.
Thanks, Chair. Personally, when you drive through that sort of area, that bit of greenery looks quite nice. It doesn't look constrained to me, to be perfectly honest. There's not sort of lots of high-rise buildings all round it. But sadly, all of our points have been lost because of what the QC has said. And yes, we've got less than a year of housing supply. I think it's just really, really sad. And I don't think I've got any alternative, but we can keep going round and round in circles here, other than to support the officer tonight, and that's my view.
Thank you, Councillor. Just like to bring Dan back in, because you haven't heard from Dan for a while, but I think he has some information of relevance regarding this point we've just been discussing.
I think there's maybe three things to say. I think, first of all, what Lucy's referring to was the 5 tests for imposing conditions, imposing 106s, and the one that's been focused on here is relevant to the development to be permitted. Now, if it were the case that, for example, this development has the effect of cutting off or, otherwise making something that is there more difficult, it may be relevant in planning terms, and the committee might take a view on the fact that it may be relevant that you could try and do something to connect, if it were possible in law, in the sense of, is the land there? And I think that maybe comes on to the second point, which is this committee has the power to impose conditions to seek Section 106s that achieve things. If this is refused and goes off to an inspector will determine those things. So it may be the committee wants to look at inventive ways of using conditions or Section 106s to make what is otherwise what the committee might want to refuse acceptable. I'm not saying that that will always work, because ultimately you can appeal things like conditions and the like. But I just wanted to explain that as long as it needs to be relevant to the development, but if the development is not giving that connection and that is harmful, then it might be that you, as a committee or the planning officers, could go back and see if the developer would offer something. Unfortunately, I'm not aware of the land position around there. I think the issue might be, Lucy, that it's just simply there is no publicly available land that connects on the east and northern side. And that may be, Councillor Maney, why it's ultimately not achievable, because in law you can't, basically take someone's garden away from them for the connection. But it may be that you can, as the committee, consider there is other relevant ways of getting around that problem that the developer might consider.
Thanks, Dan. So, Steve Taylor next.
Thanks, Chair. I was just trying to really help some of the earlier debate, the best way, I think, to view it is it's not integrated into anything else. But then, in fairness, most of the developments that go on these days aren't anyway. They tend to be somewhat isolated. And that's why there's often issues about traffic moving in and out and all that sort of stuff, because they're not integrated. But I'd also play devil's advocate, and I agree, I know the site. The reason I know it is because a long, long time ago, when they first came up with education, I actually went there, and so I'm aware of the surroundings of it, and I don't believe there is a viable connection. But what you wouldn't want, I might suggest, is a road connection through to the Kennington's estate, because I think that could prove more of a problem than a benefit. Just playing devil's advocate there, so just a thought. But a footpath, if it were viable, would at least help the people on Kennington's to get into Aveley. And I absolutely agree, and I understand Councillor Manley's sort of question there. But I can't think of a way through between the two. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Steve. Councillor Byrne, I think you were next.
Yes, 106 money, does that carry any real weight for planning? Because 40, for me, 40,000 to the NHS is a third of a doctor's salary, so it's not going to change the world, is it? So do we put any weight at all on 2 days for a doctor?
I mean, I think the question would be for the planning officer in the sense for it ultimately depends how your local plan and the relevant planning policy brings that in.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Byrne. So we consult the NHS on any planning applications for over 10 residential units, and it is what they ask for. So it goes through a calculation which they hold, which is based on the need in the area. So that figure comes directly from the NHS, and we can't change that.
Do we know what the NHS would actually want to use that for?
Yeah, so it's to do with expanding GP surgeries in the local area.
Dan.
Sorry, Chair. Just to assist Councillor Byrne as well, when considering things like Section 106s and conditions and the like, you might want to address your mind to, first of all, whether it's mitigating a harm of the development, and so it's making what otherwise is negative better, or if it is actively positive. So it's not just neutral, but it's adding something. And you as a committee will need to conclude how much weight you give to something if it's mitigating a harm rather than actively providing a benefit.
Thanks, Dan. Councillor, have I been mispronouncing your name all this time? I've been calling you Councillor Maney. Should it be Councillor Manny? It is Maney. Yeah, one up to me. Right. I am so petty. Councillor Maney, you'd like to come back in?
Thanks, Chair. For the benefit of the people in the room that don't know Kennington's, there are no pavements there. So, there's no pavements on the north side of the bypass, so people can't even walk along the road into Kennington's. They would have to go cross south to go north again. There's no pavements on the northern side of the bypass. You know what I mean? Yeah.
So are we saying that is something we might consider as a potential condition, or is it a valid condition to ask for? Lucy?
Yeah, so it kind of goes back to the point that we've been discussing. So it needs to relate to this development, and that adding a pavement there wouldn't benefit this development, so we can't require it in planning terms.
It would increase footfall through this development, surely, because people using that pavement would then go through the new development. If you have, if we're planning at all to build any commercial premises there, that could be a definite benefit.
Yeah, it's the application's just for up to 90 residential units.
Julian, yes, do.
Yeah,
do
I'm
come
going to
in.
add that the difficulty may be is whether there's actually land available to actually provide that facility. So potentially, if there's no highway land on that side of the road where the road could be, or a footway could be expanded, then potentially in highway terms that means that's something we would have to purchase to actually accommodate that. I mean, that's something I can look at in terms in the, another day, in another, go back in the office and look what is the current highway land and whether it would be feasible to actually provide such a facility. But as Lucy said, it's not associated with the development. But obviously, if members consider that that's something that the highways could go away and potentially have a look at in terms of links outside of the planning application, if you like, that's something I can obviously go to the highways team and have a chat with.
Thanks, Julian. Lucy.
Yeah, I just want to be clear on that this is something which is outside the scope of this application, what Julian just said.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's worth taking a moment, taking a view on where we're at with the debate so far. So we've talked about the difference between Greenbelt and Greenbelt and what makes some Greenbelt more valuable than other Greenbelt. And we have questioned the definition of this particular area as constrained. I don't know whether you've heard enough to convince you that yes, it is constrained, or whether you still feel that no, we don't accept that. So that's one point that's come out of the debate so far. We've started talking about the linkage with Kennington's. I suggest that what we've been doing there is starting to move into the question of conditions, which, as has been mentioned, is potentially a way of making the development more acceptable, but that's based on the assumption that one isn't going to refuse it. So perhaps the conditions, it's a way, if your concerns about the development can be dealt with via conditions, then let's discuss that. If conditions are really just icing on the cake, then perhaps that may not change your view. Certainly, what we do understand is that if we were to add conditions, except with conditions, they need to be conditions that are relevant to the actual site that is in front of us. And then thirdly, 106 money. I think the key thing about 106 money, as I understand it, is that to have some weight, that it needs to be sufficient for the purpose. What I understand from Lucy is that in terms of this money that's been proposed by the NHS, they consider that sufficient for what they have in mind to do. So it seems to satisfy them. Again, we as a committee need to decide whether those 106 contributions, again, contribute enough positive to outweigh the negative. Now, on that basis, is there anything else that anybody would like to add to the conversation? Councillor Maney.
Sorry, Chair. Everything I'm hearing tonight is convincing me that this application is not right for that part of Averley. Everything I'm hearing, there are no linkages, and everything that I'm hearing tells me that this site is not right for this development. There's a talk about in the report. It says something about the Harrier Primary is going to be up and running shortly. I don't know if you guys know something. I don't, but that's kaput at the minute. It's shut down. The lights are off. The security guards have gone home, and they've been gone a very long while. So I don't think that's relevant at all. That school is going to overcome the issue of a few children not being able to get in. But aside of anything else, I just think that this undermines your claim that this is very special circumstances, because in my view it absolutely is not, because we've established that, we've just established tonight it's not right, I think, personally, but nothing that's been said here tonight will convince me that this is the right site for this application. I think it's quite a dreadful application, actually. But I'll shut up now because you must all be sick of me.
Not at all. This is what we're here for. I'm going to slightly play devil's advocate, Councillor. What would, in your opinion, make this an acceptable development? So in other words, where is the distance between what's on the table and what you would consider to be okay?
Quite a lot, I would say. Quite a lot. I am a long way away from thinking that this is anything that I would vote on.
So it's not about specifics.
No.
If you had this, if you had that,
I don't believe
in general, it doesn't feel right to you.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't, and it won't feel right to a lot of people, I wouldn't have thought. Like I say, there's no roads, there's no linkages. I know I'm going on about that. It's just not the right site for this, and that's been reaffirmed to me by the officers that are saying we can't do that because we would have to, like Julian said, we'd have to get a bit more highways, and we can't do that because it's taking someone's garden. Well, it's not the right place then. And there is also, it's on the very edge of Bellis Park, at the very edge. I mean, there's a bit of heritage harm there. That may be a weak argument, but it's on the edge of Bellis Park.
I think in terms of arguments, it might be worth going back to that slide that you showed, Lucy, because at the end of the day, I think my understanding in terms of having a robust reason for refusal is to be able to say, well, we disagree with what's down here. So either in terms of the weight on the right added to the benefits, or the weight on the left. So do we believe, for instance, the reduction of the openness is only a moderate harm? Or are you saying that actually, given that it's in quite large part bordered by open fields, that it actually would reduce openness significantly?
Absolutely, Chair. I mean, the green belt and the development, or the proposed development of this site, there is a clear demarcation between Aveley and the Kennington estate, and this represents sprawl of a sprawl of a large development. There's no demarcation if this development comes to fruition. It's a clear demarcation, and this is just not going to be there anymore.
So in terms of the, how do we phrase that in terms of the openness of the reason I'm testing this is because if you really feel that this is absolutely not a good development, we need to be able to explain why. So I think you're articulating yourself very well, actually, and I wouldn't worry about that. It's just as my understanding is that we have to very much couch our decisions in planning terms, and that's, as has already been mentioned, we're not necessarily qualified for that, so we're just doing our best. Councillor Byrne?
Yes, I've heard all the arguments, and I don't think we've got a lot of choice, really, and I agree with Steve. I mean, I can't see any reason why I can't support the officers tonight, and then I'm going to go home and I know I'm going to beat myself up because it's harmful to the Greenbelt. So I'm going to go home and hate myself, but I've got to vote with the officers. So just tonight, this is totally through me tonight because
Can I ask why you feel you need to vote with the officers? I'm doing this to try and pull this out of, where are we?
Their arguments has convinced me. That's what they're for, isn't it? And I've listened to what they've said and I go along with what they say. So I can't argue against what they've said.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Councillor, and thanks for your candour there. Councillor Kelly and Councillor Lydiard.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So obviously I voted against this last month. It's obviously gone away. It's done its due diligence, and a little bit like Councillor Byrne, I think unfortunately we've gone to the end of the road here. We've tried to reject it. Greenbelt is a good substantive reason to refuse. I still think you could probably wrap that up and send it off if you really wanted to be stubborn about it. But unfortunately, it's become clear over the last few weeks that if we continue to reject these, they're just going to be lost on appeal. We shouldn't reject a scheme because we're worried about an appeal. Having said that, you know, it is a lot of money, and that is taxpayers' money. So it's not necessarily my money, it's taxpayers' money, and we have to justify that cost. The bottom line is, and here's the real kicker, page 35, 4.2, if members are minded to refuse, officers suggest new reasons. I'd ask yourself, Chair, what are those new reasons other than what we've already come up with? I don't think exist other than being really stubborn and just refusing it on Greenbelt. Councillor Lydiard's in favour, Councillor Byrne's in favour, I'm reluctantly in favour with Councillor Byrne. The bottom line is this is going through, so I think we need to come to some form of conclusion. Or obviously, it would be interesting to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
I am struggling, I think, as much as you are, Councillor, but I do think we need, in order to refuse it, we need to be able to have clear grounds. Even if they are, I mean, okay, the same grounds, but we are prepared to put them in such a way that we feel they're robust. I would hate to have us vote one way or the other purely because we think we got no chance. So if you don't think it's right, then you don't think it's right. If you have been convinced by the officers, that's a different thing. You may not like it, but you feel that they've put good enough arguments up, that's one thing. If you're still not convinced, but you think we're going to lose, that's another thing. For me, you're convinced or you're not convinced. On a point of principle, I would say either you are or you're not by the arguments. Councillor Lydiard.
Just that the deciding factor for me was that we haven't even got a year's supply of housing, and the homeless situation in Thurrock is appalling at the present moment. So, you know, think about that.
Anybody else? I think I probably ducked the question, actually, Councillor Kelly. I personally don't like this much as a development, but I do see the importance of getting up to our required level, and it's one of those, I think, probably a little bit like Councillor Byrne. I don't like it, but I understand the reasons that are put forward, and I can't think of any good enough reasons to say no. So I would say I will also be reluctantly, and I stress reluctantly, voting with the recommendation. So on that really rather downbeat note, do we feel ready to go to the vote? Okay, so I'll go to the recommendation. Do bear with me a second. This is what happens when you keep your thumb in a sheaf of paper and then you take it out. Right. Thank you, Ash. So the recommendation is to grant planning permission subject to the referral to the Secretary of State, the planning conditions and the planning obligations as set out in the recommendation section of the report attached at Appendix 1. So, do I have a proposer for that? Thank you, Councillor Kelly. Seconder, Councillor Byrne. All those in favour? Sorry, Carly, did you get that? All those against? Thank you. And obviously we have 3 councillors who are not in a position to take part. Thank you, councillors. I do appreciate that that is not a happy ending, but I do think this illustrates our role. We aren't necessarily always in a position to get what we want, but it is important that we, as local councillors, debate and discuss and challenge what the officers put in front of us. We did challenge. Somebody's come back and knocked all our challenges over, which isn't, perhaps not very nice, but I guess we needed to hear it. And at the end of the day, we, I think, have voted more with the heads than with the hearts. But that's what we're here to do. So thank you very much. And the recommendation is approved. Okay, so I think we've managed not to require a suspension of standing orders. In which case, I don't think we have anything further to consider. So I would like to call this meeting to a close, and we are, excuse me, the big hands on the, yes, we are at 5 to 8. Thank you very much, people, for your time. And thank you, officers, as well.
Thanks, Chair.